Welcome to the second part of my conversation with Dr. Silvia Pellicer Ortin about Linda Grant's A Stranger City. In this part, we discuss some of the more fantastic elements of the novel and the role of social media. If you haven't yet listened to the first part, I suggest you check that out first. And if you're enjoying our conversation, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Welcome to the second part of our discussion on A Stranger City by Linda Grant. If you didn't watch or listen to the first part, I do suggest that you please check that out first. If you did, then welcome back. So, Silvia, we discussed a little bit about Brexit, about the significance of London. And for the most part, London is represented fairly realistically. And in fact, it goes into detail in all these sort of different communities in London. But there are some parts of the novel which feel more fantastic, describing what I would call kind of folds in time. So the example I've got in mind in particular is there's a canal and there's this weird little cottage that seems to be stuck in, I don't know, the 1940s or 50s. And it's full of these, you wouldn't necessarily say antiques, but sort of chintz, sort of those rows of flying ducks and stuff that people used to have in their houses. And, one of the characters thinks she hears an elephant. In a later episode, a different one, one of the characters actually hallucinates more suggestively a concentration camp. So, could you tell us what's your take on these fantastic episodes? How do you read them and how they interact with the more realist sections which make up most of the novel?
Well, I recognize I had to read this episode several times when I was analyzing the novel, because to really make sense of it, as we have said, Linda Grant's style is quite realistic in general. So it was like, wow, what is this? And I think it's very important to understand the meaning of the novel. I think the character of Francesca is very telling in this sense. She's the descendant, she's the character that has Jewish origins. She's the descendant, her grandparents are. And in all these episodes, she in the end makes some comparisons, I believe, I interpret it like that, between today's Britain, or we could say European politics, about migration and Nazism. Because as you said, when she discovers this place, she's taken to this place by some neighbors, we have to say, and they tell her they are going to teach her a lesson, and she feels like Alice in the Wonderland. So this adds this kind of surrealism to the scene. What we find is a timeless place, as you said, people that seem to be living in the past. Also, it is said that people inhabiting this place work mainly as bee men, and that they did not welcome foreigners. And then in all this visit, we find this kind of dream, or as you mentioned, this hallucinatory state in which what she said she sees there takes her to the memories of her visit to Auschwitz when she was a teenager, and she visited with her grandfather, I think it was, and she makes some parallelism between this place she's visiting now, which is also called the island, and it is said to be an anomaly of the place. So she establishes a parallelism between what she sees there and the concentration camps. She also says that in this place she sees some figures that seem to evoke deportees or refugees. She says these are people, like homeless people, finding a place for their permanent departure. And again, she connects these people with people in the concentration camps. And for me, it reminded me of the figure of the Musselman, of Agamben, these people that have been devoid of any kind of agency. So I think this is the main purpose of this episode. is to make this comparison, but also the neighbor that takes her to this place is Mrs. Shapiro, who is also Jewish. And then she says, in this island, in this strange place, has never been invaded. And I think this is a parallelism with Britain. And I think that what it may tell us is that the consequences of Brexit may be similar, or it can be a metaphor of what happened during Nazism. So I think there is a clear connection there. Using, as you said, this dreamy atmosphere, those realistic elements, but I think it's a warning.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you said about your experience of reading it, I was very similar. I said at the beginning of the first section of this discussion, it's quite a readable book, but then you get to this passage and you're like, wait, what? And you're kind of going back pages. What's going on here? An elephant.
Yeah.
And
how, some twins. There are some strange girls by the river. So it's really, yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I guess one of the things the novel is asking you to do is to look, right? Because you also have this image of the trains with deportees going past and just these glimpses, right? Which, the character who's looking at them is gone to look. For most people, you wouldn't be aware of those trains taking people out of the country. So, it's sort of asking you to pay attention, I think, for sure. But also, yeah, making these quite stark connections with the Holocaust. Just to touch on some of the theory you mentioned, Agamben and the figure of the Muslim who's in a lot of the testimony or descriptions of the concentration camps, this figure of the human being who's sort of stripped of all humanity and hope is referred to as the Muslim, sort of slumped figure. I think Primo Levi for me is some of the most powerful, right? I mean, it's all powerful, but Levi, I think for me, stands out as one of the great, writers of Holocaust memoir. And Agamben, of course, is associated with the idea of bare life, like life reduced to its biological minimum. And I suppose the warning is that, by denying people rights such as the right to remain or the right to shelter is a step towards that state. Do you think that's a fair kind of summary of the warning that is sounding in this text?
Yeah, and the fact that it is Francesca who discovers this place is not a coincidence. No? She has this diasporic background herself.
Yeah.
Even she doesn't want to show it, no?
Yeah, yeah.
She never wants to disclose her foreign origins. That's also very relevant.
Yeah. Shifting to a little bit of a different question. There's quite a lot in the novel about different types of media. So we see characters interacting through social media, at times in ways that are important for the story. So, for example, Chrissy sort of disappears at some time and, a clip of her on social media is shared. Elsewhere, events are seen through TV, get knowledge spreading through gossip, through rumor. So, I mean, what role do you think these different forms of communication and media play, I suppose, in general, and in a city like London as it's represented in the novel? And are these harmful? Are they positive? Is a sort of clear commentary on those, or is this just sort of part of the texture, if you like, of London?
I think it is quite realistic about the time we're living in. All these events in the novel that you mentioned happen every day, recorded in a concert, and then it becomes viral, no? Or you have the terrorist attacks, and 1 minute later, this is in all the news in all the world. So I think what at least it suggests to me is that yes, we are so much interconnected. We are more connected than ever before, but yet we are feeling more disconnected than ever before. So this opposite effect that sometimes social media, social networks may have, that we may be connected through Instagram, through Facebook, but then people do not look at each other. Chrissy becomes viral, but Chrissy was on the bridge at the very same moment that Valentina jumped into the river, and she never realized about it. So I think there is also some critique there that, yeah, we are so much connected, but where is our human, intrinsic, deepest connection?
Yeah.
I think that's lost.
And yeah, I mean, there's a sort of sad irony, of course. She goes viral. There's a clip of her dancing, isn't it? And just looking very kind of carefree. And like millions of people have seen this and people recognize her. And then, yeah, you got the moment on the bridge where she's there as Valentina jumps and that's not seen and, nobody sees it, right? So there's a kind of contrast between that virality and, the CCTV footage, which follows her and then sort of loses her. So again, this idea of what we see.
I think see invisibility. You mentioned it at the very beginning. I think that's also an issue in the novel. No? You said that the novel is forcing us to see the people we have around us because we are not seen nowadays. Also, we have distractions everywhere. Attention is lost. We don't pay attention to the really important things. So that's a message that I think is very important of this book.
Yeah. And let's bring in, I mean, one of the main characters is a documentary maker. So one of actually the few British characters. And obviously this is quite a specific form of media. It's more deliberate, or I suppose you could film a viral clip quite deliberately, but I suppose a documentary is more crafted, would take longer to put together, right? So how do you think his documentary sits with these other forms of media and the issues of visibility we've mentioned?
I think it's like an alternative, perhaps a more ethical alternative to other types of news or content we can find on the web. He has also an ethical drive to create this documentary because he really wants to know about the story, and also he wants to try to collaborate somehow to find the identity of this woman. And in the end, it is the documentary that helps knowing who she was. So I think it is shown as an ethical alternative, as a way to portray. There are other ways to portray reality. And also we can know that the story was in fact inspired by a real case of a woman who jumped into the Thames. That's quite similar in 1992, and there was a documentary. So Linda Grant was inspired by also this event and this idea that no one seemed to know her. No? And after the documentary, at least it was discovered.
Yeah. I like the fact you mentioned the word content there. It's like you're not even producing a story or a song. It's just content. It's just stuff to sort of throw out there. And the documentary seems very much the antidote, I suppose, to that. Yeah. I guess we've touched on this question, but let's address it head on then. So, straightforward question: do you read the novel as optimistic or pessimistic?
Well, I find a combination of both. I also have to fight against my personal optimism when I read. But I think pessimism is obviously there because we have seen characters making connections between past migrations and Brexit, between the Nazi treatment of camp prisoners and European policies towards refugees, between violent episodes that happened in London, because we have mentioned two different wars and two different events at the present moment, and this idea that history repeats itself, that these crises are always going to happen. So, of course, there is pessimism, but I also see some positive aspects. I think all this vulnerability, fragmentation, all this sense of rupture, the message we get in the end that it can only be over, we can only go beyond that by going for connectivity and relationality, as we see in the final scene that I have just described. We have the consciousness of all the characters, and how there might be some hope in the future if we really accept, we look at the other, we see that just as I am fragile, the other is. And I think this message is also there. No? That first we have to do this work of recognizing our vulnerability and to look into the other side, which is what not happens, no, in the novel. And so in more general terms, I also liked this work, but more in this case within the context of the writer, of Linda Grant. I think this is a step further in her production. As before, she got mainly, as I've said, focused on more aspects connected with Jewishness, Jewish feminism, Jewish female characters. And this novel, as we've seen, is more global, is more transnational. We have women as very important characters that represent vulnerability and care. But I think it's a way of this writer to go beyond and to go more to a transnational space and to more global worlds. Just not only reproducing or representing the Jewish case, no, but going beyond, which for me is something positive within the context.
Sure. And maybe we can talk about some of her other novels in the third section coming up. I mean, you mentioned connectivity as being one of the potential positives that can be found. But clearly, it's got to be a certain type of connectivity because, you know, we mentioned the German family who want to be citizens of the world, but they're slightly kind of rootless. So could you maybe, and you mentioned, you know, there's sort of ethics of care in the novel, that it's important to notice the people who we don't normally notice. And I think the novel also recognizes that's not easy because you're in a city of millions. Could you maybe could you think of some examples from the novel where this sort of positive form, ethical form, let's say, of connectivity is shown to us? Are there any characters who really achieve this or get some of the way to doing that?
I think Chrissy is a good representative of care. First, she's a nurse, in her job, she tries to care for people. And I really like when she meets Rob, to explain it. Rob is an American professor who is doing some stay in London. He's now in London, and he's one of the victims of the terrorist attacks. And then he suffers from PTSD. He feels he cannot connect to anyone after the attack. Even though the media are trying to contact him, he has received, we can say, the label of victim, but he feels blocked. And Chrissy is his nurse when he is injured after the attack, and he needs to connect with her. They become friends. They end up living together, sharing a flat. In that case, you feel how he needed a real connection to someone who cared and who really was there to understand what he had gone through to overcome his trauma somehow. I think this couple in the narrative is not a love couple. It is friends, that they become friends. It's a very good example of that.
And yeah, it's interesting because from what we understand of her job, you know, you mentioned she's suffering from PTSD. She's a nurse. We don't get the sense she's trained to give psychological help, right? Her role is, you can sort of picture one of these really no-nonsense nurses who tells you to stop complaining and, you know, patches you up and sends you out the door. So actually it's not, in a sense, the care is not, strictly speaking, a professional role, yet they establish that connection, that kind of rapport on a personal level. And I suppose, I mean, for me, yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great example. It is possible to connect with people from diverse backgrounds. But of course, you can't do it with everybody. I think there's always that sort of held in reserve in the novel that you could try, but of course, in a city of millions, you're not going to be able to interact with everybody equally, right? So it's a sort of, there's a slight sense of you can never quite do it, but you can try. Is that how you came out of it feeling? Or
yes,
yes, yeah,
yes. I at least even though, as we've said, it's a novel quite critical with the situation we are living nowadays. Well, I know if it's pessimism, it's our reality. We are many of the things that happen in the novel are happening now. But I think there is some hope, in the small gestures, small actions that perhaps we can do in our daily lives, and just pay attention. I think it's the idea, paying attention to what is around us.
And yeah, I mean, the other thing to say is, all of these people are shown to be basically decent and caring people. So the potential for that kind of care is always there. Maybe with the exception of the weird little island, which is like a racist bubble stuck in the past. But apart from that, I think, it shows there is potential for this care, but it's this matter of attention and effort.
Yes, at least there is some hope at the end of the tunnel. Or we want to believe that, no?
Yeah. Okay, do you have any final comments you'd like to make in this section of our discussion?
Just as I said at the beginning, I really encourage readers to come across this work. Well, Linda Grant, I think, is quite popular in the UK, but for instance, here in Spain, she's not so well known. I really hope some of her novels could get translated into Spanish, like this one or other ones that she has, because I think she's a very good writer, very accessible. You need to have some historical background to understand, but just you can start with A Stranger City, but she has many other relevant novels.
And we could talk about those in the third section. So let's finish this section here. Thank you, Silvia, so much for your comments and your great answers. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. And please do join us for the third part when Silvia will recommend some, talk about some other of Grant's texts and other similar and related novels. So hope to see you there.